The obsidian walls of the grand conclave of Ethelgard did not reflect the light of the stars, for the stars were going out. High Archon Thalcora stood before the transparency field, her four-fingered hands gripping the railing with a force that threatened to fracture the delicate, crystalline bone structure beneath her pale, translucent skin. Outside, beyond the atmospheric envelope of the capital station, the void was not the comforting, velvet darkness of her youth, nor was it the canvas of exploration that her ancestors had sailed with hearts full of arrogance and hope. It was a maw. A bruised, violet scar stretched across the firmament, a bleeding wound in the fabric of reality where the scourge had consumed the Xylos system only 3 standard cycles ago. The silence in the grand conclave was heavy, a physical weight that pressed against the lungs of every delegate present, a suffocating pressure born not of atmospheric failure, but of finality. They were the last. The gathered representatives of the Galactic Coalition, a union of 1,000 species that had stood for 10,000 years, were now reduced to a huddled few in this final sanctuary, waiting for the inevitable mathematical conclusion of their extinction. The air smelled of recycled oxygen and fear, a sharp, acrid scent that no amount of filtration could scrub from the ventilation systems. Thalcora turned slowly, her heavy ceremonial robes, woven from the fibers of the now-lost moon of Valles, dragging across the polished floor with a sound like a dying breath. She looked at the faces of her peers, and she saw only reflections of her own despair. There was Subcommander Vrex of the Grognar, a species of hulking, silicate-based warriors whose fleets had once been the unbreakable anvil of the Coalition. Now Vrex sat slumped, his tectonic plates grinding softly in agitation, his lava-hued eyes dim and fixed on the holographic tactical map that dominated the center of the room. The map was a sea of red, an encroaching tide of hostility that had swallowed sector after sector, leaving nothing but dead worlds and silence in its wake. Beside him sat Matriarch Alara of the aquatic Hydari, her levitation tank bubbling softly, her tentacles drifting listlessly in the nutrient fluid. The Hydari were the philosophers, the diplomats, the ones who believed that all conflict was merely a failure of communication, a misunderstanding to be rectified with patience and empathy. The Scourge had not listened. The Scourge did not communicate. It simply ate. And now Alara's tank was silent, her telepathic aura withdrawn into a tight knot of grief. "The outer perimeter buoys have gone dark," Vrex said, his voice a deep, resonant rumble that vibrated in the chest cavities of everyone in the room. He did not look up from the map. He spoke as if reading an obituary that had already been written. "The Scourge has bypassed the nebula. They are utilizing subspace corridors we didn't even know existed. Our calculations regarding their propulsion capabilities were optimistic, like everything else we have done." The large Grognar slammed a heavy fist onto the table, cracking the projector lens, but no one flinched. The energy for anger had been expended cycles ago. Now there was only the lethargy of the condemned. "We have 3 rotations at best, perhaps 2. The fleet is at 40% combat readiness, and our ammunition reserves are critical. We cannot hold the line, Thalcora. We cannot even slow them down." Thalcora moved to the head of the table, her movements fluid but weary. She activated the central interface, and the image of the galaxy flickered, zooming in on their current location, the Ethelgard Sanctuary, the last bastion of civilization. "We are not here to discuss holding the line, Vrex," she said, her voice possessing a calm that felt brittle like glass ready to shatter. "We are here to discuss the unthinkable, the option we buried in the archives of the Founders. The option that was forbidden by the First Concordat." A ripple of unease moved through the room. Even the stoic Alara shifted in her tank, a stream of bubbles escaping her gills. They knew what she was referring to. It was a myth, a ghost story told to younglings to frighten them into obedience, a dark chapter of galactic history that had been sanitized and redacted until it was nothing more than a whisper. "You cannot mean them," Alara's synthesized voice spoke from the speaker on her tank, tremulous and horrified. "The vanished, the architects of ruin. Thalcora, this is madness born of desperation. The legends say they were exiled for a reason. They were not driven out by the Scourge. They left because they were incompatible with the peace of the stars. They were chaotic, volatile masters of weapons that tore the fabric of causality itself. To summon them is to invite a destruction as absolute as the Scourge, perhaps worse. At least the Scourge is a force of nature. They were a sea of will." Thalcora rested her hands on the table, leaning forward, her eyes burning with a cold, hard light. "And where has our peace gotten us, Alara? Where has our diplomacy, our restraint, our harmonious coexistence led us? It has led us to this room, waiting to be butchered like livestock. The Scourge does not care about our moral superiority. It does not care that we banned the Omega-class weaponry or that we dismantled the planet Crackers. It only cares that we are organic matter to be consumed. Yes, the humans were dangerous. Yes, they were unpredictable, but they survived. And when they left, they did not flee in defeat. They left because we asked them to. We feared them, so they walked into the dark. She paused, letting the weight of the ancient history settle over them. The first Concordat records show that before they departed, they left a beacon, a single quantum-entangled frequency, locked in a buoy drifting in the gravimetric shadow of the galactic core, they said. They said that if the night ever became too dark, we could light the fire. A fire that burns down the house is no salvation, Vrex grunted, though his objection lacked heat. He was a warrior, and he knew the reality of their situation better than anyone. He looked at his claws, chipped and worn from months of desperate, losing battles. But a fire is better than the cold. If we die, we die. If we call them and they destroy us, we are no worse off than we are now. But if the legends of their martial prowess are true. He trailed off, a flicker of something dangerous ignited in his eyes. Hope, or just a desire for vengeance. We do not even know if they still exist, a new voice interjected. It was Executor Kale of the Cyber Synod, a being of metal and light, his logic processors humming audibly. The timeline suggests they departed over 4,000 cycles ago. They headed toward the Great Void, the space between galaxies. No resources, no stars, just entropy. It is statistically probable they perished within the first millennium. We would be shouting into a grave. Then let us shout, Thalcora whispered. Let us shout so loud that even the dead can hear us, because I will not go silently into that violet maw. I will not let the history of the Ethelgard, the art of the Hydari, the strength of the Grognar be erased without one final act of defiance. If the humans are dead, then we join them, but if they are alive... She tapped a sequence of commands into the console. The holographic map shifted, focusing on the dense, chaotic gravity well of the galactic core. A single, faint pulse appeared, a dormant signal waiting. We have the encryption keys. My predecessor passed them to me as his did to him. We never thought we would use them. The room descended into a heavy silence. The decision hung in the air, a guillotine blade waiting to drop. The Scourge was days away. The reality of their extinction was no longer a theoretical model, but a sensory experience. They could feel the floor vibrating with the distant impacts of the enemy's vanguard breaching the outer systems. Vrex looked at Thalcora, then slowly nodded. Alara closed her eyes, her tentacles curling around her torso in a gesture of prayer. Kale's processors whirred, calculating the odds, and finding them zero in every scenario except this one unknown variable. Do it, Vrex said. Thalcora did not hesitate. She keyed in the final sequence. It was a complex algorithmic key based not on mathematics but on a prime number sequence derived from the atomic weight of iron, the element that kills stars, the element that flows in the blood of the vanished. The console hummed, a deep basso tone that resonated through the floor. A beam of tachyon energy, focused and intense, shot from the spire of the station, bypassing the limitations of light speed, piercing the chaotic radiation of the core and striking the dormant buoy. The message was simple. It contained no coordinates, for the buoy knew where the signal came from. It contained no plea for help, for the act of sending it was plea enough. It contained only a single data packet, a digital impression of the galaxy as it was, burning. Then they waited. Hours turned into a cycle. The cycle turned into two. The tension in the Grand Conclave transformed from sharp anxiety into a dull, throbbing headache. The sensors showed nothing. No return signal, no subspace rift, no salvation. The Scourge fleet appeared on the long-range scanners, a cloud of millions of bioships, a swarm that blocked out the stars behind them. The proximity alarms began to wail, a mournful, rhythmic siren that sounded like the heartbeat of a dying god. It failed, Kale stated, his voice flat, stripped of emotion. The buoy is inactive, or they are gone. The Scourge Vanguard will be within weapons range in 4 standard hours. Thalcora slumped into her chair. She felt a profound sense of foolishness. She had pinned the last hopes of a galactic civilization on a ghost story. She had looked to the heavens for angels and found only the empty, indifferent dark. Evacuate the civilian transports, she ordered, her voice hollow. Send them into the nebula. Perhaps a few will survive the hunt. The fleet will ram the Scourge command ships. We will buy them time. It has been an honor, Vrex said, standing up and drawing his ceremonial plasma blade. The energy hummed, casting a harsh green light on his rocky face. The first bombardments hit the station's shields. The floor bucked violently, throwing Alara's tank against the wall. Sparks showered from the ceiling. The holographic map turned a solid crimson red. The Scourge was here. The view screen showed the swarm, writhing organic shapes of chitin and flesh, spitting streams of corrosive acid and plasma that dissolved the hull plating of the Coalition cruisers. The defensive line was vaporizing. It wasn't a battle, it was a harvest. Thalcora watched the slaughter, tears of silicate fluid running down her cheeks. She gripped the arms of her chair, waiting for the hull breach, waiting for the end. The sensors screamed as a massive Scourge dreadnought, a moon-sized abomination of flesh and bone, detached from the swarm and drifted toward the capital station. Its maw opened, charging a weapon that would shatter the station into dust. "Impact in 10 seconds, Kale announced. 9-8. Thalcora closed her eyes. 7-6. The lights in the room flickered and died, leaving them in emergency red. 5-4. The station groaned. 3. Suddenly the siren stopped, not the manual shut-off. The sensors stopped screaming because they were blinded. A new reading washed over the system, a gravitational spike so massive, so impossible, that the station's internal artificial gravity compensators failed for a split second, lifting everyone out of their seats before slamming them back down. "Report," Vrex roared, struggling to his feet. "Sensors are saturated," Kale stammered, his logic loops fraying. "Massive gravitational lensing detected. Something has entered the system, something. Enormous." Thalcora looked at the view screen. The image was distorted, bending and warping as if space itself was being folded like wet paper. Between the defenseless station and the encroaching Scourge dreadnought, the stars vanished. They were blocked out by a shadow, but this was not the biological shadow of the Scourge. This was hard, angular, cold. Space didn't shimmer or swirl with the elegant blue of a wormhole. It tore. A ragged, jagged laceration appeared in the void, bleeding exotic radiation, and from the tear a prow emerged. It was gray, a dull, industrial, unpainted gray that absorbed the light of the nearby sun. It was scarred, pitted with the impacts of micrometeoroids and weapon fire from ages past. It was ugly. It was terrifying, and it just kept coming. The ship was a monolith of brutalist engineering. It possessed no sweeping curves, no aesthetic graces. It was a block of metal, engines, and guns. It was 5 times the size of the Scourge dreadnought. As it fully emerged from the tier, the displacement of space sent a shockwave that pushed the smaller Scourge vessels away like dry leaves in a gale. Then came another, and another, 12 of them. 12 floating mountains of steel and tungsten, their hulls bristling with kinetic batteries so large they looked like planetary thrusters. They formed a wall, a physical barrier between the Coalition and the Scourge. The communications console on Thalcora's desk lit up. It wasn't a request for a channel. It was an override. The frequency was ancient, utilizing an analog carrier wave that bypassed modern digital filters entirely. The static cleared and a voice filled the grand conclave. It was not the melodious, harmonic speech of the Valeri, nor the guttural resonance of the Grognar. It was a low, gravelly sound. It sounded like rocks grinding together, like a storm on the horizon. It sounded tired. "This is High Admiral Julian Voss of the Terran Reclamation Fleet," the voice said. There was no fanfare. "No, we come in peace. We received the signal. Coordinates confirmed. Apologies for the delay. The space between galaxies is dense." Thalcora found her voice, though it trembled. "High Admiral, we are the Galactic Coalition. We are under attack by the Scourge. Our defenses are failing. We request immediate assistance." "We can see that," the voice replied. There was a pause, a moment of silence where the only sound was the hum of the open channel. "Stand down your fleets, Coalition. Retract your shields to minimum output to conserve energy. Get your civilians behind our wake." "Stand down," Vrex barked at the screen. "That dreadnought is charging a singularity cannon. If we drop shields, we are dust. If you keep them up, the feedback from our displacement drive will fry your emitters," the human admiral replied, his tone SH. Ifting from tired to commanding, it wasn't a request. "We are not here to debate, move." On the screen, the Scourge dreadnought, seemingly unbothered by the arrival of the new players, fired. A beam of concentrated antimatter enough to crack a planet's crust erupted from its maw, streaking toward the lead Terran vessel. Thalcora gasped. "Evasive maneuvers," she screamed, though she knew it was useless. A ship that size couldn't dodge. The Terran ship didn't move. It didn't even raise an energy shield. Instead, a series of vents along the hull opened, venting a cloud of dense, shimmering particulate matter. The antimatter beam struck the nose of the human ship and dissipated. It splashed against the gray hull like water against a cliff face. The ship didn't even shudder. The kinetic energy was absorbed, dispersed, and eaten by the armor plating. "Armor integrity at 99%, the human voice said, sounding bored. "Thermal plating holding, Scourge energy signature analyzed, organic-based plasma with antimatter catalyst, primitive." "Primitive," Kale whispered. "That beam destroyed the Xylos Armada." "Target locked," the human admiral continued. "Firing main battery 1, kinetic rounds, no warheads, just mass." From the prow of the lead Terran ship, a railgun the size of a skyscraper accelerated a projectile. There was no flash of laser light, no slow-moving plasma bolt. There was just a distortion in the air, and then, instantaneously, the Scourge dreadnought ceased to exist. It wasn't an explosion in the traditional sense. The projectile, moving at a significant fraction of the speed of light, imparted so much kinetic energy upon impact that the biological matter of the enemy ship was instantly sublimated into plasma. The shockwave shattered the surrounding Scourge escort ships. The dreadnought was simply erased. A cloud of expanding gas was all that remained. "Splash 1, the voice said. "Fleet free fire, clear the sector, keep the firing lines clean, don't hit the locals." What followed was not a battle. It was an extermination. The 12 Terran ships advanced, their point defense cannons weaving a curtain of lead and tungsten that shredded the smaller Scourge fighters. Their main batteries thumped with a rhythmic sledgehammer cadence, each shot claiming a capital ship. The Scourge, a hive mind that had never known fear, paused. The swarm wavered. They tried to swarm the Terran ships, to overwhelm them with numbers, to latch on and corrode the hulls. Thalcora watched the tactical sensors. "They are boarding," she warned. "The Scourge are boarding the human ships." "Let them," Admiral Voss said. "Our Marines haven't had a proper workout in 3 centuries. Internal sensors active. Venting decks 4 through 10. Engaging CQC protocols." The battle lasted 20 minutes. The Scourge fleet, which had consumed 1,000 worlds, which had driven the Coalition to the brink of extinction, was reduced to drifting debris. The Terran ships didn't pursue the fleeing remnants. They simply held their position, forming a steel wall around the Ethelgard station. The channel crackled again. "Sector clear," Voss said. "We are sending a shuttle. We need to talk." The shuttle that docked with the Grand Conclave was as scarred and utilitarian as the motherships. It hissed as the airlock cycled, the heavy magnetic clamps thudding against the delicate Coalition docking ring with a jarring lack of finesse. When the ramp lowered, steam vented into the pristine reception hall, and 5 figures emerged. They were bipedal, encased in powered armor that added a foot to their height and considerable width to their shoulders. The armor was painted a matte olive drab, scratched and dented, adorned with white stenciled letters and symbols that Thalcora did not recognize: a eagle grasping lightning, a skull, a simple geometric globe. The helmets retracted with a mechanical hiss, revealing the faces of humanity. Thalcora had seen holograms of them in the archives, but the reality was more striking. They looked soft. Their skin was pink and beige, vulnerable to radiation and temperature. They lacked the natural armor of the Grognar or the energy shielding of the Valeri. They looked fragile, yet their eyes told a different story. Admiral Voss walked in front. He was an older male, his hair gray and cropped close to his skull. A scar ran down his left cheek, and his eyes were the color of cold iron. He did not carry a weapon in his hands, but a heavy pistol was magnetized to his thigh. He looked around the grand hall, taking in the crystal spires, the floating Hydari tanks, the terrified delegates. He didn't look impressed. He looked sad. "High Archon," Voss said, stepping forward. He didn't bow. He extended a hand, an ancient gesture of greeting. Thalcora hesitated, then reached out with her slender, 4-fingered hand. The human's grip was warm, dry, and incredibly strong, though he was clearly Ho. "Elding back." "Admiral Voss," she said, her voice echoing in the silent hall. You came, the legend said you had abandoned the galaxy." "We didn't abandon it," Voss said, releasing her hand and looking at Vrex and Alara. "We outgrew it. Or rather, we realized that our presence here was causing more problems than it solved. Every time we invented something, someone tried to use it to blow up a moon. Every time we tried to help, we destabilized a culture. We realized that the galaxy needed to grow up on its own. So we left. We went to the Void to build our own home where we couldn't hurt anyone." "You went to the Void?" Kale asked, stepping forward, his optical sensors zooming in on the Admiral's armor. There is nothing in the void, no energy, no matter. Voss cracked a grim smile. There's plenty there if you know how to look. We learned. We adapted. We built megastructures around brown dwarfs in the deep dark. We learned to harvest zero-point energy. We learned to be quiet. Why did you come back? Alara asked softly. The signal, we thought it was a myth. We left the buoy as a promise, Voss said, his expression hardening. We told ourselves we'd only come back if the threat was existential, if the galaxy was facing something it couldn't talk its way out of and couldn't fight its way out of. The Scourge, we've met them before, in the dark. You knew of them, Vrex growled, and you did nothing. We fought them in the intergalactic void for 1,000 years, Voss snapped, his voice rising. Why do you think they're only arriving here now? We held them back as long as we could. We shattered their main hive tendrils. What you see here, this Scourge, is just the stragglers that slipped past our blockade, the runts of the litter. The revelation struck the Council like a physical blow. The invincible enemy that had slaughtered the Coalition was merely the leakage, the survivors of a war fought in the dark by a species they had thought were cowards. But we aren't here just to kill the Scourge, Voss said, his tone shifting, becoming quieter, more urgent. The Scourge are running too. You need to understand that. They aren't invading. They're fleeing. Thalcora felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Fleeing? Fleeing from what? Voss looked at his lieutenants, then back to the High Archon. We call it the Silence. It's not an enemy you can shoot. It's an entropy wave, a collapse of local space-time laws. It started in the Andromeda sector, and it's spreading. The Scourge are biological consumers. They sense the decay of the universe's constants before we did. They are running toward the center of the galaxy because the gravity well of the core slows it down. But it's coming. The universe is dying, Alara whispered. This region of it is, Voss corrected. The physics are unraveling. Stars will stop burning. Atoms will stop bonding. It's a heat death accelerated by a factor of 1 billion. Then we are dead, Vrex said, dropping into his chair, the fight draining out of him. If the humans cannot stop it, if the Scourge is running from it, there is no hope. You returned only to watch us die. No, Voss said firmly. We returned to take you with us. He tapped a control on his wrist armor, and a holographic projection sprang up in the center of the room. It showed a map of the galaxy and then zoomed out, far into the black void between galaxies. There in the middle of nowhere hung a structure. It was a ring, but a ring of such magnitude that it defied comprehension. It encircled a captive star, a red dwarf that had been dragged there. The ring was an artificial world with surface area equivalent to 10,000 Earths. The Ark, Voss said. We've been building it for 4,000 years. It's self-sustaining. It has engines, massive gravity drives that can move the entire structure. We are leaving this local cluster. We are heading for the virgin fields of the Sagittarius Stream beyond the reach of the Silence. Thalcora stared at the hologram. The scale of the engineering was impossible. It was the work of gods. And yet here stood the builders, short, scarred, fleshy creatures in scratched armor, looking tired and grumpy. You built this for yourselves? Thalcora asked. Built it for everyone, Voss corrected. We knew the Silence was coming eventually. We didn't know if anyone back home would survive long enough for us to pick them up, but we kept the lights on, we kept the rooms ready. He looked at the gathered aliens, his eyes softening. We have habitats for the Hydari aquatic sectors with simulated currents. We have high-gravity tectonic zones for the Grognar. We have crystalline spires for the Ethelgard. We didn't forget you. We never forgot you. Tears welled in Thalcora's eyes again. The humans had been cast out, feared as warmongers, as chaotic elements. And in their exile they had not plotted revenge. They had not built a weapon to con. Cur the galaxy, they had built a lifeboat. The Scourge is the immediate problem, Voss said, returning to business mode. We have to clear the infestation before we can begin the evacuation. My fleet is establishing a perimeter, but we need your help. We have the firepower, but we don't have the transport capacity for your entire populations. We need every civilian ship, every freighter, every garbage scow you have operational. We will cover you, but you have to move fast. The Silence is maybe 5 years behind the Scourge. We have to be gone before the physics start to break. We will be ready, Thalcora said, her voice ringing with a new strength. The despair was gone, replaced by a frantic, burning purpose. High Admiral, the Coalition is at your command. Voss nodded. Good, let's get to work, and Thalcora. Yes, Admiral. It's good to be home, even if it is on fire. The weeks that followed were a blur of frenetic activity. The human fleet, the reclamation fleet as they called it, was a marvel of logistical efficiency. They didn't just fight, they organized. Human engineers boarded coalition stations, retrofitting engines with efficiency that bordered on magic. They bypassed safety protocols, welded armor plates over viewports, and turned luxury liners into high-capacity refugee transports. Thalcora watched the humans work. They were loud, they shouted, they used crude language, they drank a bitter black liquid called coffee by the gallon and slept only a few hours a night. They were chaotic, just as the legends said, but their chaos was focused. It was a weaponized drive to save life. She saw a human marine teaching a grognard whelp how to play a card game while waiting for a transport. She saw human medics in the Haidari water wards, wearing sealed suits, treating plasma burns on tentacles with gentle hands. She realized that the chaos of humanity was actually passion. They cared so deeply, felt so strongly, that they couldn't help but interfere. They couldn't stand by and watch suffering. The Scourge tried to regroup. A second wave, the main body of the fleeing swarm, entered the system a month later. It was 10 times the size of the first. This time the humans didn't just stand there, they attacked. Thalcora stood on the bridge of the flagship UNS Dauntless, invited by Admiral Voss to coordinate the evacuation. She watched as the human fleet executed a maneuver they called the Thresher. The 12 massive dreadnoughts linked their targeting computers. They deployed thousands of drone fighters, unmanned, AI-controlled kinetic kill vehicles. The drones didn't fire, they were the bullets. They accelerated to relativistic speeds and slammed into the biological mass of the Scourge fleet, tearing holes in the formation. Then the dreadnoughts opened fire with their secondary batteries, nuclear-pumped X-ray lasers. The darkness of space was lit up by a grid of searing white lines, a geometry of death that dissected the Scourge. "Left flank buckled down," Voss shouted across the bridge. "Battery 4, adjust elevation, don't let them get near the civilian convoy." The ship shook as Scourge suicide pods slammed against the void shields. "Shields at 70%, a tactical officer yelled. "Hold the line," Voss roared. "Not one transport gets touched, do you hear me? Not one." Thalcora saw the sheer determination on the faces of the bridge crew. They weren't fighting for territory. They weren't fighting for glory. They were fighting for the defenseless ships behind them. It was a ferocity born of protection. The mother bear instinct, Voss had called it once. The Scourge broke. They were mindless consumers, but even they understood that this wall of gray metal could not be breached. They scattered, fleeing into the deep void, away from the terrifying monkeys and their guns. "Clear," the tactical officer breathed. "Hostiles retreating." A cheer went up on the bridge. Not a polite, disciplined cheer, but a raucous, shouting, fist-pumping roar. Voss slumped in his chair, wiping sweat from his forehead. He looked at Thalcora and winked. "See, told you. Just needed a little percussive maintenance." The evacuation took a year. The Great Migration, the historians would call it. The sight of the coalition fleet, millions of ships of every design and color, flanked by the massive gray hulls of the Terran Navy, moving through the dark. When they finally reached the coordinates of the Ark, Thalcora wept. It was beautiful. A ring of silver and green hanging in the void, a jewel of life in the endless night. It was vast enough to hold them all. There were continents tailored for the Grognard, oceans for the Haidari, cloud cities for the Kestrel. As the ships docked and the offloading began, Thalcora stood with Voss in an observation lounge overlooking the interior of the ring. It was a lush paradise, a testament to what humanity could do when they turned their minds to creation instead of destruction. "You saved us," Thalcora said. "You saved everyone." "We just built the boat," Voss said, looking at the distant curve of the artificial horizon. "You all have to row it. We're going to the Sagittarius Stream. It's a long trip. 10,000 years at sublight, but the ring has drives that can fold space. We'll be there in 20. "What happens then?" she asked. Voss shrugged. "We start over, we build a new coalition. Maybe this time we get it right. No secrets, no exiles. We face the dark together." He turned to her, his expression serious. "But there's a condition, High Archon." "Name it anything." "We're not leaving again," Voss said. "We're staying. We're going to be part of the council. We're going to be loud and annoying, and we're going to argue with you about everything. We're going to bring our music and our bad food and our problems." Thalcora laughed, a sound that felt strange after so many years of silence. I think we can handle that. In fact, I think we need it. The galaxy was too quiet without you. Good, Voss said. He looked back out at the stars, the new stars, the ones they were traveling toward. Because it's going to be a hell of a ride. Far behind them, light years away in the galaxy they had left behind, the stars began to wink out one by one as the silence claimed the old world. The physics unraveled, the history dissolved. But the ark moved on, a silver needle threading the eye of eternity, carrying the seed of 1,000 civilizations, guided by the species that had once been the monsters and were now the guardians. Humanity had returned from the heavens, and they had brought hope with them. The great engines of the ark flared, a blue brilliance that outshone the distant, dying galaxies. Thalcora watched the light reflect in Admiral Voss's eyes. She realized then that the humans were not gods, nor were they demons. They were simply the ones who refused to give up. When the math said 0, when the universe said stop, humanity said no. And that, she realized, was the most powerful force in the cosmos. Course set, the navigator called out. Engaging displacement drive in 3, 2, 1. The stars streaked into lines of infinite light. The past was gone, the future was waiting. Thalcora took a deep breath of the recycled air, which smelled faintly of ozone and coffee. It was the smell of life. "Let's go," she whispered. And the ark vanished into the space between spaces, carrying the last fire of a dying night into the dawn of a new day.